Hey everyone, doing a video review of EF Dawah today, and we're dealing with Abbas, one of their main front men, and we're confronting the question of why does God create human beings knowing in advance he's going to send them to hell? It's a great question. It's a question I've never heard a good answer to. Let's see how Abbas deals with it.
I have a friend of mine who's studied Islam, and he, by learning a lot of it, he thinks it's potentially the truth of all the other religions.
Right.
But he has like one question, and the question is like, why would God create certain people knowing that they would go hell? And this is a tricky question for him, and he can't just it's a hard question for him because he thinks that question is deterring him from Islam, for example. So I would want to know, how do you guys deal with that response?
And it's worth saying here actually, because the likes of Abbas and Imran, all these EF Dawah guys, they often claim that Muslims will leave the religion for emotional reasons. Now, although this is in part an emotional reason, I think it's also a very logical one here, because they're dealing with a fundamental contradiction within Islamic ideology. This idea that God predestines your fate, and also you're supposed to have free will at the same time. So it's a question fundamentally about logic. It's not about emotion. So you can understand that any well-thinking person is going to have a problem with this issue.
All right, Brother Nazam, why don't you start with this one, inshallah?
Okay, you throw me right in the deep end. Okay, so Muslims believe in free will. So people end up in hell not because God determined it that way, but God isn't going to force people to believe in Him. In fact, we believe that every child is born pure and sinless, so they've been created to be in God's mercy.
Right, okay, so they've been born sinless to be in God's mercy, but at some point they come out of that. Now, here's his explanation.
But God is not going to force them to remain in that straight path, which is His mercy.
Right, so you've got a being that's within God's mercy, and God's idea is not to force them to stay there. How are you forcing someone to stay in God's mercy? Surely that's the place you want to be. If anything, what you're saying is that God is going to force you out of that mercy position to risk your soul. For what reason?
So there'll be people who will choose to reject that mercy and choose it.
But who would do that? Who would, given the choice, say, okay, look, I've got God here. I completely believe in this God. I'm in His mercy. There's no risk to my soul. Now, just for some random reason, I'm just going to choose to be evil and risk myself going to hell. How does that make any sense?
Different path. And so, God tests people, and throughout the life, they would they would receive different signs and warnings.
But what would you need signs and warnings for? If you start in that place where there's no risk to your soul, why would you ever step out of it? It makes no sense.
Telling them not to take this path of damnation. But if people end up in a bad place, then they won't have anyone else to blame but themselves.
Yeah, they would have your God to blame, assuming that He actually exists.
Yeah, and Brother Manthar, you know what it is? This issue of qadr, this issue of predestiny, of destiny, even from an atheistic point of view, you can't escape it.
Well, I mean, if you mean that, yes, we live in a cause and effect universe, which I think we do, then yeah, you can say that you're going to be the victim, if you like, of the circumstances of that. I mean, I'm not a believer in libertarian free will. There are some atheists who are, but generally speaking, I would say most atheists would say, yes, we live in a predetermined universe. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have morality or anything like that. I mean, they're fairly easy questions to deal with. But I mean, he's right in the sense that, yes, overall, most atheists will probably say, yes, we don't believe in libertarian free will.
Because if you believe that the universe is simply a function of matter and energy arranging itself in a particular way, then it is inevitable that you will become a murderer or a killer or a rapist or a thief, because
Well, no, it's not actually, because obviously other people can be there to potentially prevent you from becoming those things in the future by having an influence on you. But yes, in the sense of we're still in a predetermined universe, that's true. But it does not represent the same moral problem as it does for you, because you're claiming that we've got free will.
the trajectory of all of those causes, prior causes, those prior causal links will determine what happens next.
Yeah, but also, I mean, just on this point, it's a bit of a sidetrack, but it is related. Think about what the alternative was if it wasn't that you were in this cause and effect chain. It would basically just be things happen for no reason. So, in a way, there's nothing wrong with that being a cause and effect universe. That's a stable, sane universe that we can understand.
And so
Yeah.
you can't escape it. And so the reality
Yeah, but we don't need to. You do, because you're claiming free will.
here is that how do we as Muslims understand qadr, predestiny? How do we understand everything happening by the will of Allah, the plan of Allah? How do we understand these things? And I like the explanation that I heard from Sheikh Abu Alia. I like the explanation I heard also from Muhammad Hijab on.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, you know, if he likes the explanation from Muhammad Hijab that this is going to be fucking awful.
Sapiens Institute, and that contextually to try to join that qadr of Allah and free will, how they actually join is something of something that hasn't been fully answered or is answerable.
Right. So the answer that you like is you haven't got an answer. That's the answer that you like. I mean, you failed right there. You failed halfway through this little video.
Okay.
However, there is something that overshadows this whole concept, and that is that Allah is perfectly just, as Nazam mashallah pointed out.
Well, no. I mean, this is the whole question. This is the whole thing that's under question. This is what the guy is asking. He's saying, how can you send someone to hell if it's been your plan, if you've decided this from the start before the being even exists, that they're going to hell no matter what? That's the question. So therefore, you can't just assume that your God is perfectly just, because this is the thing that's on trial, essentially.
Yeah.
So therefore, however this somehow fits together, the overwhelming, the overarching quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the attribute of Allah, the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that no soul will be treated unjustly.
No, you can't dodge to that. That very principle is under threat until you can give a proper explanation for how you can have free will and predestination at the same time. Unless you can answer that question, then the idea that your God is just is a contradiction.
And no soul will complain on that day that they were treated unjustly.
Yeah, I reckon there'd probably be a few, actually, assuming this bizarre scenario actually played out.
Yeah.
In other words, what that means is that people will be treated and judged with absolute perfection of justice.
Perfect perfection of justice. I mean, you can see how he's struggling with this question because he can't answer it. I mean, he's already pretty much thrown in the towel when he says he likes the answer that they haven't got an answer. But look how he's struggling now and bumbling over his words, because he knows that this question absolutely fucks Islamic ideology. He knows that there's no way around it.
Yeah.
So that's our iman, that's our belief. And now the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself said that when these discussions of qadr, you start to delve in them in a very deep way, he said, leave this subject.
Yeah, isn't that telling? I mean, from day one, from the founder of the damn religion, they've had the same response. We can't answer this question. It's a contradiction. So just don't ask questions about it. So from square one, the religion has been avoiding the question from Muhammad himself.
Because you won't get
Okay.
it. You won't understand it. This is beyond, this is the unseen.
No, this is the nonsensical. That's the point.
This is not something your mind will be able to grapple. But we are simple people.
Yes, it's not something you'd be able to grapple with because it doesn't make any sense.
But we are simple people.
Well, you might be.
And when Allah tells us something about himself, it has to be true. If Allah says,
so just believe it on default. That's the, you know, the religion that says, oh yeah, we encourage critical thinking and go and look at the world to try and understand it. Basically, just accept it a priori. It's just something you have to accept first up before you can even answer the question.
says that Allah is perfectly just, that has to be true.
No, it doesn't, and that's the point. And this just shows how feeble it is. The only way you can make sense of this is to say, don't ask questions, and it has to be true automatically, even though we can't give you a fucking good reason why.
So all of the other concepts, no matter how difficult they might be to understand, they can't.
No, not difficult to understand, impossible to explain. There's a difference between those two things. It's an inherent contradiction. It's not difficult to understand. It's by its nature contradiction.
Contradict the very attribute of Allah of perfect justice.
Yeah, but it does contradict it, and that's the point.
So we look at it in that way. So I hope that helps, inshallah. And the thing is, you know, often from an atheistic point of view or a materialistic point of view, you know, they want an answer, a categoric answer that they can make sense of.
Oh, how terrible. I mean, aren't we unreasonable, us atheists, for saying we want a reasonable explanation for a fundamental question?
But this is whether whether willfully or you know or whether it's just something that they're doing subconsciously.
Yes, we willfully want a reasonable explanation for this bullshit you're talking.
This is a form of arrogance, you see, because
it's always this with EF Dawah. I mean, they really should. They should change the name of the channel to "Don't Ask Questions, You're Arrogant," because this is their default position. I mean, it was the same thing with Imran. I did a video a while back when there was an agnostic asking him for some kind of empirical evidence that a God exists. Completely reasonable question. And the default position when he couldn't say anything else, it's just like, you're arrogant for asking. So essentially, according to EF Dawah and many other Islamic apologists, if they can't answer your question, you're arrogant for asking it. And yet they'll say in the same breath that this is the religion that encourages you to think and use your mind.
Saying that unless I understand every little concept, I'm not going to accept it.
Well, it's not every little concept, because you're trying to imply that this is just some nitpicking thing, you know, some trivial, frivolous detail. It's really not. It is the fundamental question again. It is basically saying, what's going to happen to your soul? Assuming you had a soul, what's going to happen? Are you going to burn in hell for all eternity? So it's fundamental to the religion. It's fundamental to where you're going. This is not a small issue, and it's a fundamental contradiction that you cannot explain. So therefore, you're just trying to hand wave it away.
And for us as Muslims, we've been told that there are things that are seen and there are things that are unseen.
Yes, you've been told that you can't ask these questions because these questions can't be answered.
So how, for example, if somebody says to me, well, I have never seen angels, prove to me that angels exist, and unless you prove to me angels exist, I will not accept Islam. But
well, I mean, that's a bit of a weird side issue, but yes, I mean, you could, I mean, wouldn't necessarily say that disproves Islam. I mean, it certainly disproves that claim that angels exist. If you can't, well, again, you make the claim, and if you can't provide evidence, why should anyone believe it? Yes, but this is something far more fundamental than fucking angels.
Allah has already told us that this is of the unseen. This is not of any use to you.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not of any benefit to you.
It's not of any use to you. Then why is it in a religion if there's no use to it? Why is Allah interjecting useless things into the religion?
And Allah has kept this deliberately unseen from His creation, right? So
Then why would He do that? What's the point in alluding to something and then say, "Oh, not really going to tell you about it though"? Peekaboo. I mean, what kind of crap is that?
We have to be careful of how we answer these type of questions. Yes, everything happens with the qadr of Allah. Everything happens by the will of Allah. Everything happens by the plan of Allah. How does that join to free will? Is enveloped with the perfection of mercy and rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for us as Muslims, that's enough. Alhamdulillah. I know I'll be treated fairly. What have I got to worry about?
Why would God create?
Yeah, well, you don't look too convinced by that, to be fair. You know, that looks like a desperation in your face at the end. But that's it, isn't it? You know, this is enough for us as Muslims. So again, Abbas and Imran, and they try to style themselves. Well, I don't know if they try to, but they certainly seem to have this veneer of being a bit more sophisticated than the likes of Ali Dawah and Muhammad Hijab. But ultimately, right at the end there, he's saying, yeah, this is enough for us to not be able to ask the question, to have a fundamental contradiction pointed out in the religion that essentially destroys the religion, and just saying it's the unseen. We can't answer it, but you're not supposed to think about it. I mean, how is that any different to a cult? Just don't ask the fundamental questions and just accept that it somehow makes sense, even though it doesn't. You know, just accept that you can have a square circle. Just accept that you can have a married bachelor. And then you wonder why any careful, thoughtful Muslim might leave over issues like this, because you can't answer the basics. And to be fair, no religion can answer this question. So yeah, just a tragic failure from Abbas there to answer such a basic question. And yeah, it's amusing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.